I'm Nick Westergaard, and this is On Brand, helping you tell your story. My guest this week is Michael Ian Kaye.
It's less about keeping up and more about creating ideas that are innovative, feel new, and there's this tension between kind of newness and kind of brand identification. And so when it comes to building brands, I think there's a new way of thinking.
Michael Ian Kaye is the Chief Design Officer at SYLVAIN, working with a diverse set of clients, including Walmart, Meta, Kate Spade, Marriott, Stella Artois, Calvin Klein, IMG New York, Fashion Week, and The Information. His work in strategy, design, and communications has helped shape, define, and impact many well-known brands and institutions across industries. Kaye's iconic designs for books like Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point and Chuck Palahniuk's Fight Club have left an indelible impression on American culture. His work has received numerous awards and resides in the permanent collection of the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum. My interview with Michael Ian Kaye is coming right up. But first...
My dad works in B2B marketing, but I never really knew what that meant. Then one day my dad came by my school for career day and told everyone in my class he was a big ROAS man. Then he just kept saying things like, the bigger the ROAS, the better, over and over. My friends still laugh at me to this day. I think it means calculating a return on ad spend. One thing's for sure, I'll be known as the ROAS man's kid for the rest of my days. Why couldn't you just be a fireman or a lawyer? Why? You ruined my life, Dad.
Not everyone gets B2B, but LinkedIn has the people who do. And with ads on LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people based on job title, industry, likelihood to buy, and more. Start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Deborah Eckerling hosts a great podcast called Goal Chat. Deb, tell listeners what to expect from the big program.
You can't reach your goals on your own. You need your people. So every week I bring in 3 of my people to dive into the topic, whether it's business, work-life balance, or something else, to motivate them and get them excited about their goals.
And where can people subscribe?
You can go to thedebmethod.com. Find the show at marketingpodcast.net or search for Goal Chat wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe.
Michael Ian Kaye, welcome to On Brand.
Thanks so much, Nick. Super happy to be here with you.
I am excited to chat with the designer behind some of my favorite book covers. The Tipping Point, Fight Club, both iconic books. I'm looking at The Tipping Point right now on my shelf. But it reminds me that they're not only iconic books, there are iconic covers. And, boy, that saying of you can't judge a book by its cover really is not, maybe it's one of those sayings that I feel like is not true because we do, right?
Well, for sure. And I think that the goal when designing books was, beyond kind of creating these, kind of identifying or kind of conceptual covers that spoke to kind of what the authors were trying to convey. I always kind of believed that my job, especially back then designing book covers, was about actually appealing to the bookstore owners or the people that were unpacking books at the Barnes and Noble, because you always wanted them to connect with it and to display it face forward. So that, in addition to how people see it and receive it and kind of popping off the shelves and using different techniques to kind of separate or kind of to kind of move forward on a shelf of 20 books, making sure that there was something there that drew the eye to that particular cover. So it was with intent.
Well, and that's a really interesting analysis, too, of the kind of brand touch points of a book cover, because I've never you think from a consumer standpoint about it popping off the shelf. But when you talked about even unpacking the book and the many different people responsible in the process for displaying that book and even the people unpacking it. I think that's such a it's easy to miss all of these different human points of interaction throughout design. How do you kind of audit your audience in taking on a design project that is so big like that?
Well, it's funny in some ways, so big like that and yet so small, because
Right.
in the publishing world, there's very little budget in terms of advertising or kind of marketing. So a lot of kind of where books are and how they're placed is the only marketing that a book would actually receive. So the kind of intention behind designing these things and understanding that placement is key is really top of mind as you're creating it, and not so much that you're kind of overshadowing or not complementing the content, right? At the heart of designing book covers, I think you want the authors to see the cover as an extension of their idea, or a true kind of bringing the book to life. And so balancing kind of author's intent, because it is in many cases literature, it is in many cases art. So wanting to be respectful of the content, and at the same time being aware of who the book is intended for, what are the other things that they might be reading, and either kind of, and trying to both fit in and stand out. So that notion of, and kind of what inspired me kind of to move from books kind of more broadly into brand design is really that kind of understanding of an audience, understanding of a product, understanding of an audience, and how do you kind of draw that connection. And sometimes there are multiple audience, right? There's the person unpacking the books, and then there's the person who's shopping for the books. So that's just a small kind of analogy, I guess, of the broader marketing space, where there are, multiple audiences as you develop kind of identities and kind of consumer facing design.
Well, and as we look at this complex ecosystem that all of this takes place in, I think the other challenge beyond the different parties involved, like you said, is the rapid speed of trends and visual trends today. I'm thinking of, as we're recording this, we're a week into the presumptive candidacy of Kamala Harris, who has kind of adopted the Charlie XCX brat, green and lo-fi font. And these things kind of come in and out like tides. How can brands and designers keep up?
I mean, I think it's less about keeping up and more about creating ideas that are innovative, feel new. And there's this tension between kind of newness and kind of brand identification. And so when it comes to building brands, I think there's a new way of thinking, in that you're not necessarily creating kind of a stamp or a monogram that's repeated over and over again. You're actually trying to create a design system, kind of a way in which a brand might think and behave, that can express itself in multiple ways and evolve, and both partake in be trends, partake in trends, and kind of be malleable enough to do all the things a brand kind of needs to do across all the proliferation of touch points. So it's a bit different these days, for sure.
And as we talk about all of the different things that a brand needs to do today, I'm reminded I mentioned as we got started that I'm in Iowa and I teach at the University of Iowa, which means I'm among the many legions of new WNBA fans because of the rise of our own Caitlin Clark. But in looking at the WNBA brand, here you've got another brand that is having a moment and has both been around and just in your own involvement with that brand's development over the years. How does a brand that exists meet a moment of of rapid scale and exposure as it's seeing now?
I mean, many ways. One is, I think, kind of not feeling like, again, kind of it's only the kind of the physical assets, the kind of things that the designers are making that propel a brand forward. I think embracing kind of change, embracing culture, and making sure that the kit of parts, if you will, which goes beyond these things. The kit of parts are the players. The kit of parts are the stadiums. The kit of parts are kind of how fans are engaging. And I think that it's much more about kind of embracing those things and kind of aligning them with the values of the brand, or making sure that they're aligned with the values of a brand. And that's where kind of, I don't know, there's I'm beginning to buck against tradition and not trying to sell just the pieces, but making sure that the pieces that we as designers are creating are, one, rooted in a brand idea, right? Like making sure that these pieces come out of a really robust strategy and brand positioning. But two, that the branding does not end when you hand over a set of guidelines that have, all of the color palettes and the voice and the motion assets. The branding, that's just the beginning of branding, in my opinion. Branding is making sure that as they go out into the world, whether that be via advertising, whether that be experiential marketing, or whether that be kind of physical brick and mortar, is making sure that the essence of that brand permeates all of those components. And I think that that's where there is a big shift, and needs to be a big shift, is kind of moving away from a kind of a design-based thinking in terms of needing all of the kind of, as I say, the componentry, to thinking about, I need to be branding at every point that a consumer or my teams internally come in contact with a brand. And so that's about kind of feeling, vibe. It's about intent and understanding what kind of what response you're actually looking for as these things go out into the world. And so for me, that's where kind of the future of branding lies, is being able to look more broadly at kind of the behaviors of a brand.
On Brand, we'll be right back after this.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Deborah Eckerling hosts a great podcast called Goal Chat. Deb, tell listeners what to expect from the big program.
You can't reach your goals on your own. You need your people. So every week I bring in 3 of my people to dive into the topic, whether it's business, work-life balance, or something else, to motivate them and get them excited about their goals.
And where can people subscribe?
You can go to thedebmethod.com. Find the show at marketingpodcast.net, or search for Goal Chat wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe. You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Robbie Samuels hosts the On the Schmooze podcast. Robbie, tell listeners what to expect from the show.
Since 2015, I've interviewed entrepreneurs who overcame challenges to achieve success in their field or industry. Tune in to On the Schmooze to listen as I ask deep questions to elicit untold stories about leadership and networking.
And where can people subscribe?
Find the show at ontheschmooze.com or on marketingpodcast.net, or just search for it wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard them. Go subscribe.
Now, back to the show. So I will preface this by saying that this is probably the most I've talked about basketball in the On Brand podcast, but I'm intrigued also by the stories behind brands, and this has been an interesting year also because it saw the passing of Jerry West, who was known for many things, including being the silhouette in the NBA logo, but it's been a different brand story when it comes to the WNBA logo. There are rumors out there, but the line seems to be that it's not any one person. And I think that when you consider that as a brand touch point, it really endows it with more meaning. So I wondered if you would either confirm, deny, or just silently nod along with any of what I'm saying on the specifics of the W's logo.
It isn't one player, and it's actually an evolution of a kind of the first attempt that the NBA made in creating the logo for the WNBA. And what was interesting about the original mark is the player's hair was down, the shorts were ill-fitting, and there was no grace, there was no kind of stature that was aspirational in that original attempt. And what had happened is, the NBA, the MNBA, the men's NBA said, let's create a league. Let's create a similar kind of pool of assets that we have for the men's NBA, and really didn't talk to the players or look at the players and understand that there was something different about how women moved on the court. The players told us when they looked at the existing mark that I would never play with my hair down. So we put their hair up. And so really it was about looking at kind of the aggregate of players, understanding kind of that this needed to be something that inspired them, that this needed to be something that they wanted to be, right? And so we redrew that mark with a sense of grace, a sense of motion, and really a sense of integrity that mirrored the integrity that the women were bringing to the court.
That is so inspiring and well said. And you managed to make my wife's new favorite joke, which is referring to the men's WNBA.
Well, I mean, it's like what happens when you get a bunch of men trying to create something new versus really thinking about including kind of both the women players are the product, right?
It's also really good, beyond that specific kind of case study of it, but it is a pretty telling example too of what you just said of integrity, of authenticity in design, as opposed to another process that is just, okay, what's the a different version of this same thing that already exists, instead of acknowledging that it's something of its own that has its own meaning around it to be built around and embraced as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a potential pitfall, right? Brands want to fit in, and kind of when going through the process of branding or rebranding, they look at like brands. And, there are people that are marketers that, understand the value of things that are already out there and want to, create things that fit in. And then there are marketers who understand that the brand needs to stand out. This goes back to the book jacket conversation earlier, and really want to create something that is either reinventing a category or kind of standing out because their values are different. And I think that for me, those are the courageous marketers that you want to be working with, because they do understand that fitting in is only part of it, but it's really about bringing the true essence of the brand to life, whether that be in a digital space, in a physical space. But that integrity that you speak of needs to be kind of both embraced by whatever the CMO, but in addition to that, kind of align with the value of a brand that wants to be in, that wants to have integrity, right? And I think that those kind of values are not always built into the DNA of a brand.
That's such a good point, and some good takeaways there too. You talk about being a fan of alliteration. I love this idea, but I'd like you to say more about it, about designing for dopamine, and even some of the ethical quandaries therein.
So there's a lot I've been thinking about in terms of algorithmic homogeneity and kind of the data that we now have that understands the journey of our consumers and kind of what they're actually responding to, and using that data to refeed the same or similar kind of brand assets. And I think that within they're actually building kind of immunity or a lack of connectivity with their consumers. But they're sacrificing kind of, I guess, branded actions, brand affinity for clicks. And I don't know, it's a hard thing to talk about, but if you think about the amount of transactional clicks that brands are putting out into the world, so the amount of times you come in contact with something that is like, see this thing, click here, versus what we used to see, which is whether those are kind of bigger campaigns, kind of video assets, things that are really kind of speaking around kind of the values of the brand. The ratio has changed over time. So what used to be, you would see a kind of, I'll say a commercial, a 30-second spot, multiple times in the arc of a week. You're now seeing that brand communicate with their consumers by asking them to click on a product. And so for me, what happens over time, or as I think about it, is that those brands go from being relevant to being transactional. And that just changes the nature of how people, one, view that brand, but want to engage with that brand. And I do think over time it creates a sense of fatigue. I don't know. I was thinking about, sometimes when you clean your inbox, and sometimes I have like thousands, but you go through and it's like on a weekly, sometimes twice a weekly basis, brands are asking you to, click here to buy this. But I mean, just the idea that I've cleaned 100 emails out of my inbox from X brand, and put it in the trash can is an interaction that I'm having with that brand. And so those sorts of kind of, I don't know, understanding that throwing a brand asset into a trash can is the way in which I'm interacting with your brand is things that people aren't considering because they're valuing the clicks more than they're valuing the interaction.
Right. They're playing the numbers game with you and your attention. You know, I might not sell you a pizza today, but you might buy one sometime this month. So I'm just going to keep blasting you, despite the fact that, like you said, you know, whether it's moving them to the trash or to another folder or tagging them as spam, all of these things, you know, I think we don't think enough about, as you very deliberately just said, that we are categorizing a brand, and that is not always a great thing if we don't. Like you said, I think we were so hungry, or have been so hungry for relevance, that it's shifted to the transactional, and the transactional leads to burnout.
I think so, and lack of relevance. I mean, I kind of, I think this is evolving, but I do think we're in a space where kind of obviously these kind of transactional kind of gestures are super important. Brands need to sell things. But what's happened is, you know, remember when, I'm old-ish, direct mail, and you would have all of these things from all of these brands kind of, you know, dropping in your mailbox, and you would trash them. And it's basically the new direct mail, right? Those were algorithmically targeted also. The kind of return rate on direct mail was fractional based on the amount of impressions or interactions, but you know, there was formulas for, if we send 10 million of these out, you know, 1,000 people will respond, it costs us this much. And that's how these interactions are being evaluated today. So it's actually quite similar to direct mail. And I think that the opportunity in there is actually to understand what kind of value might we be bringing in addition to the transactional component of it. How might we look at this slightly differently if we think about it as direct mail? Because direct mail was always seen as something that was kind of, you know, I'll say kind of, you know, bottom feeder in the marketing funnel. And I feel as though there's also this. So kind of flipping that on its head, making interactions that can foster clicks but also bring value. Those are the things that I am and want to explore in the work that we're doing. There are just so many more places. Well, actually, it's funny because I want to say there are so many more places in which people are interacting with brands, but in reality, there are fewer places. It's all on screen, right? Whether that be your kind of laptop, whether that be your phone. The thing is I don't know that people are differentiating kind of a bit of communication that's coming through an email versus a video that they're seeing on Instagram versus pre-roll, because they're all on the same devices. So there's this conflation, if you will, of the funnel whereby everybody's trying to make every interaction do everything. And I think that we're in a process of kind of sorting that out right now and understanding where the value of kind of, you know, being in different places, even though we're on a singular screen, how do we kind of understand those interactions need to happen, understand those placements need to happen, but respect kind of where they are and what they're intended to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, you've made me smile with the oldish reference. I always say that I am old enough that my first job in marketing was literally in a mailroom. So, but as we talk about smiles from the tipping point, the WNBA logo to more and more, I've certainly smiled a lot during our conversation. But I'm eager to hear a brand, Michael, that has made you smile recently.
It's very funny because my reference point was going to be the Charlie XCX. Actually, there's a brand of sausages, bratwurst, that actually employed that. And so I was, maybe we bookend it with, I think it's like field sausages or something like that, did something out of that. And that made me smile. But I also have been seeing a lot of, no, let's leave it at that. Let's begin and end with Charlie XCX from Kamala to sausage. And I think that having both of those kind of born out of a pop kind of album release really kind of, shows the potency of what good brand thinking can do and makes us all smile.
Well said. Michael, where can folks go to learn more about who you are and what you do?
Best way is probably at SYLVAIN.co, which is, where I'm working, and kind of you can see more of the work, and also more broadly how we talk about what we do.
Awesome. Well, we will link up to that in our show notes, which folks can always find at onbrandpodcast.com. Michael Ian Kaye, thanks for being on brand with us.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. It's been a fun conversation.
On Brand is part of the Marketing Podcast Network. If you like what you're hearing, if we've made you smile, you can always listen free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite platform may be. And please take a moment and rate and review the podcast to help others find the show. Until next week, I'm Nick Westergaard, and I'll see you on the internet.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Deborah Eckerling hosts a great podcast called Goal Chat. Deb, tell listeners what to expect from the big program.
You can't reach your goals on your own. You need your people. So every week I bring in 3 of my people to dive into the topic, whether it's business, work-life balance, or something else, to motivate them and get them excited about their goals.
And where can people subscribe?
You can go to thedebmethod.com. Find the show at marketingpodcast.net or search for Goal Chat wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe. This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.